I need to share something with you that happened to me just over 18 hours ago. It's a story that will challenge your understanding of reality, but I swear on everything I hold sacred that every single word is the absolute truth. I was sitting by myself in my car, parked in a McDonald's lot in Bakersfield, California, at 2 a.m. I was completely submerged in the most profound and crushing loneliness I have ever experienced in my life. In that moment of utter desolation, Jesus Christ appeared in my passenger seat. He was there to reveal the staggering truth about why we feel so alone, and how loneliness, in its rawest form, is actually God's personal invitation for us to discover that we are never, ever truly alone. What he revealed to me in that car didn't just bring me comfort in my profound isolation. It fundamentally dismantled and rebuilt my entire understanding of solitude, community, and the tangible presence of God in our moments of deepest despair and forgottenness. But before I delve into the details of my story, I would be so grateful if you could let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is where you are. I just have a deep need to know that I'm not alone in sharing this. And if the story I'm about to tell moves you, please consider subscribing. It provides me with the strength and encouragement I need to continue speaking my truth. Now, let's begin. The descent into the void. I'm recording this message from the quiet of my hotel room in Bakersfield. I stopped here last night on what was meant to be a straightforward drive from Los Angeles to San Francisco for a speaking engagement. It's 8 p.m. now, and by all accounts, I should be meticulously preparing my notes for tomorrow's event. But my mind is a captive, unable to stop replaying the revelations about loneliness that Jesus imparted to me in the pre-dawn hours of this very morning. What he taught me has completely revolutionized the way I perceive every single moment of feeling isolated, forgotten, or emotionally abandoned. To understand the depth of this transformation, you first need to understand how I ended up in that McDonald's parking lot, facing a loneliness more profound than anything I'd known since the bewildering days of childhood. Yesterday morning began like any other. I woke up in my Los Angeles apartment, the California sun filtering through the blinds. Ahead of me was a 5-hour drive up to San Francisco, where I was scheduled to speak at a large men's conference about the intersection of faith and purpose. This was familiar territory for me. I'd given similar talks dozens of times, sharing my unique experiences from playing Jesus, discussing the journey of finding God's calling, and offering encouragement to people on their own spiritual paths. But as I was gathering my things to leave, a single event, a simple text message, triggered a devastating cascade of emotions that I was utterly unprepared for. The text was from my college roommate, David, someone I hadn't had a real conversation with in well over a year. Attached was a photo from a gathering the previous night. The picture showed 8 of my closest friends from college, all crammed together at someone's birthday party. They were laughing, celebrating, looking as if not a single day had passed since we graduated 15 years ago. "Wish you could have been here, man," the text read. "We talked about you all night. Miss having you around." I found myself staring at that photo for what felt like an eternity. I saw the faces of people who had once been my entire world, my chosen family. We had shared everything in those formative years. Late-night conversations that unraveled the mysteries of life and meaning, spontaneous adventures that forged bonds we thought were unbreakable, eternal, shared dreams of staying intimately connected, no matter where our divergent careers took us. But somewhere along the way, over the past few years, as my career with the Chosen began to ascend, as my face became more recognizable, and my schedule became a relentless beast of its own, I had gradually, almost imperceptibly, drifted away from these foundational friendships. It wasn't intentional. There was no dramatic conflict, no bitter falling out. It was a slow, silent erosion, the kind that happens when success inadvertently creates distance, building invisible walls brick by brick. In the beginning, they had reached out regularly. They were genuinely excited about my role as Jesus, bursting with pride for their friend who was living out his dreams on a global stage. But as time wore on, as I became more consumed by filming schedules and international travel, as our conversations became less frequent and devolved into surface-level updates, something fundamentally shifted. I started to feel that they no longer saw me as just Jonathan, their friend. They saw Jonathan who plays Jesus. And perhaps, if I'm being brutally honest with myself, I had allowed that to happen. Maybe I had started to see myself that way too. I had subconsciously constructed walls between my public persona and my private self, and those very walls, meant to protect me, had ended up severing me from the very people who had known and loved me before I was anyone of public significance. Looking at that photo, the raw truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. I hadn't been invited. Not because they didn't care, but because I had become someone who seemed too busy, too important, too far removed from their ordinary, beautiful lives to want to spend an evening eating cheap pizza and reminiscing about ridiculous college memories. The painful truth was, I missed them with a desperation that ached in my bones. I missed having friends who knew me before any semblance of career success, friends who could call me out on my own pretentiousness, who loved me for the flawed human I was, not for the divine character I represented. But I had no idea how to bridge the chasm that had opened between us, how to transition from being the famous friend who makes occasional cameo appearances in their social media feeds to simply being their friend again. As I drove north, the monotonous landscape of California's Central Valley blurring past my window, these thoughts consumed me. My mind became a highlight reel of relational failures. I thought about all the relationships I had carelessly let slip away over the past few years. Childhood friends who eventually stopped calling because I was perpetually too busy to return their calls. Family members who had grown distant because every conversation, no matter how it began, somehow veered into a discussion about the chosen. Romantic relationships that had fizzled and died because I couldn't seem to separate Jonathan the person from Jonathan the public figure. By the time I pulled into Bakersfield around 10 p.m., I was drowning in a feeling of isolation more acute than any I had felt in years. It wasn't just the physical loneliness of being in my car. It was a profound emotional and spiritual solitude that felt crushing, like the very air was being squeezed from my lungs. I had thousands of followers on social media, hundreds of people eager to meet me at events, and dozens of professional relationships. Yet, in that moment, I couldn't think of a single person I could call at 1:00 p.m., just to talk, just to be my unedited self with, just to feel a flicker of genuine human connection. I stopped in Bakersfield to get gas and grab some food, hoping a break from the relentless highway might clear my head. But as I sat inside that sterile, fluorescent-lit McDonald's at 11 p.m., surrounded by late-night shift workers and fellow weary travelers, the loneliness only intensified, becoming a palpable entity in the seat across from me. I looked around at the other solitary figures in that restaurant. A truck driver, eating alone while endlessly scrolling through his phone. A young mother with 2 small children, her face a mask of exhaustion and overwhelm. An elderly man slowly nursing a cup of coffee as if he had nowhere else in the world to go. I realized we were all tiny islands of isolation, physically sharing the same space but emotionally and spiritually disconnected, not just from each other, but seemingly from anyone who truly knew us. The bitter irony of my situation was not lost on me. Here I was, a man who had spent 6 years portraying the Son of God, someone who spoke regularly to crowds about God's unconditional love and constant presence, someone whose work had reportedly helped millions of people feel more connected to the divine. And yet, I felt completely and utterly alone in the universe. I tried to pray there in that McDonald's booth, but the words felt hollow, bouncing off the linoleum floor. I tried to remind myself of biblical truths about God's omnipresence, but they felt like sterile theological concepts rather than living personal realities. I tried to count my blessings, but every blessing felt tainted by the sharp, painful awareness that I had no one to truly share it with in any meaningful way. Around midnight, I abandoned my attempts to feel better and trudged back to my car, my initial plan being to push through the remaining 3 hours to San Francisco. But as I sat in the driver's seat, bathed in the harsh, artificial light of the parking lot, the weight of my loneliness became utterly unbearable. It was no longer just about missing my college friends or feeling disconnected from my family. It was a deeper, more terrifying realization that I had meticulously constructed a life that looked spectacularly successful from the outside but felt catastrophically empty on the inside. I had achieved my professional dreams at the cost of personal connection. I had gained public recognition and lost private intimacy. I had become known by millions but was now truly known by virtually no one. The crying began slowly, a few hot tears of frustration and deep sadness. But then, it transformed into something deeper, something more primal. It was the kind of guttural sobbing that erupts from a place of existential emptiness you didn't even know existed until it completely overwhelms you. There I sat, in a McDonald's parking lot at 2 a.m., crying like a lost child who had lost his way home, feeling more isolated than I had ever felt in my entire adult life. And in that moment of complete emotional and spiritual collapse, I found myself asking God a question that clawed its way up from the deepest recesses of my soul. God, I said out loud, my voice choked with tears. Why do I feel so alone? Why have I become so disconnected from everyone I care about? Why does success feel like the loneliest thing in the world? How did I end up here, in a McDonald's parking lot at 2 a.m., with no one to call, no one who really knows me, no one who would even miss me if I disappeared tomorrow? The parking lot remained quiet, save for the occasional whoosh of a car on Highway 99 and the monotonous hum of the restaurant's ventilation system, the ordinary sounds of a normal night, in a world where countless people were silently drowning in the same kind of isolation I was. I don't understand, I continued, feeling reckless with a potent cocktail of grief and exhaustion. I've spent 6 years of my life representing your son, talking about your love, helping people feel connected to you, but I feel completely disconnected from everyone, and that includes you. How can someone who plays Jesus feel so utterly alone? How can someone whose very job is to represent divine love feel so profoundly unloved? The very moment those words left my lips, the atmosphere inside my car began to change. The air grew thick, heavy with presence, charged with an energy that was both profoundly comforting and unmistakably holy. The temperature shifted, becoming warmer yet also more vivid, as if reality itself was sharpening its focus. And then, sitting in the passenger seat beside me, as naturally and calmly as if he had been there for the entire drive, was Jesus. He looked exactly as I had always imagined him in my most honest, unguarded moments, completely human, yet radiating an undeniable divinity, perfectly accessible yet awe-inspiring, deeply familiar, yet wonderfully mysterious. His mere presence filled that mundane car in that ordinary parking lot with a love and understanding so overwhelming, so absolute, that my crushing loneliness began to dissolve before he even uttered a single word. His first words were not what I expected. "Jonathan," he said, his voice a perfect blend of infinite compassion and gentle amusement. "You are not alone. You have never been alone. You are simply looking for connection in all the wrong places and measuring intimacy by all the wrong standards." He paused, his eyes holding mine. "Let me show you what true companionship looks like, and why what you are experiencing isn't abandonment, it's an invitation. The 10 truths of loneliness." Jesus settled into the passenger seat of my car in that McDonald's parking lot, as if it were the most natural place in the universe for the Son of God to appear. His presence had a sanctifying effect, transforming that ordinary, grease-stained moment into something sacred. The fluorescent lights of the restaurant still cast their usual harsh, unforgiving glow, but somehow, in his presence, even that artificial brightness felt warm and comforting. "The first truth about loneliness," he began, his voice calm and clear, "is that it's not the absence of people in your life. It is the absence of authentic connection with the people who are there. You are surrounded by relationships, Jonathan, but you've lost the ability to be genuinely known within them." He gestured toward my phone, which was sitting on the dashboard, its screen dark but implicitly representing dozens of unread messages from fans, colleagues, and acquaintances. "You've confused being seen with being known. You've confused being recognized with being understood. You've confused being celebrated with being truly loved. The loneliness you are experiencing isn't because you lack relationships, it's because your relationships lack depth." I thought about the endless stream of interactions that constituted a typical day for me. Photo opportunities with fans where I smiled but felt unseen, business conversations with agents focused on strategy and numbers, surface-level exchanges with colleagues about schedules and scripts. But how do I get back to real connection, I asked, when everyone sees me as the character I play? "The second truth about loneliness," Jesus replied, "is that it often stems from hiding your true self, born from the fear that who you really are isn't lovable. You've meticulously crafted a public persona that people admire, but you've forgotten that admiration is not the same as love. Love requires knowing someone completely, their struggles, their doubts, their fears, their failures. When you hide those parts of yourself, you make genuine love impossible." He leaned back in the passenger seat, and somehow the cramped interior of the car felt as spacious as a cathedral. Think about your college friends in that photograph. What made those relationships so profoundly meaningful wasn't that you were all successful or impressive. It was that you knew each other's worst jokes, biggest fears, most embarrassing moments, and deepest, most secret dreams. You were fully known, and therefore you were fully accepted. "But I'm not that person anymore," I protested, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I can't go back to being just Jonathan from college. Too much has changed. The third truth about loneliness, Jesus said gently, is that authentic relationships are not about going backward. They are about going deeper. You don't need to become who you used to be. You need to allow people to see who you have become, including the parts that aren't camera-ready. He pointed toward the McDonald's, where the silhouettes of people were still moving about under those bright, sterile lights. Every single person in there is carrying their own unique burdens, struggles, questions, fears, and hopes. Most of them feel just as isolated as you do right now. Not because they lack people in their lives, but because they have learned to present only their most acceptable, polished selves to the world. The fourth truth about loneliness, he continued, is that it is often God's way of calling you back to authentic community. When surface-level relationships no longer satisfy your soul, when public recognition fails to fill the void in your heart, when professional success ceases to provide the connection you crave that is not failure, Jonathan, that is an awakening. Your loneliness is your soul crying out for something real, something true. I felt tears begin to well up again, but these were different. They weren't tears of despair, but tears of dawning recognition. So this emptiness I'm feeling, it's actually pointing me towards something better? Exactly, he affirmed. The fifth truth about loneliness is that it's not a problem to be solved. It's a compass pointing you toward deeper intimacy. When you feel most isolated, you are often on the verge of discovering what true connection really looks like. Jesus turned to face me more directly, his eyes holding an understanding so profound that I felt completely and utterly seen. You've been trying to find in human relationships what only I can provide. Unconditional acceptance, perfect understanding, and a constant, unwavering presence. When you expect people to fill the God-shaped void in your heart, every relationship will inevitably disappoint you, and you will end up feeling more alone than before. But I need human connection too, I protested. I can't just have a relationship with you and ignore my innate need for people. The sixth truth about loneliness, he said, is that the deepest human connections happen only when you are first secure in your divine connection. When you know, deep in your bones, that you are completely loved by me, you stop demanding that other people love you perfectly. When you are confident in my unwavering acceptance, you stop hiding your flaws from others. When you learn to rest in my presence, you stop being desperate for human presence. He gestured around the small confines of the car. Right now, in this very moment, you are experiencing the cure for loneliness. Genuine intimacy with someone who knows you completely and loves you unconditionally. This isn't separate from human relationships. This is the very foundation that makes healthy human relationships possible. The seventh truth about loneliness, Jesus continued, is that isolation often precedes revelation. Some of the most profound spiritual experiences in history have happened when people were physically alone, because that is when you finally stop looking to other people for what only God can provide. Moses met me on a mountain, alone. Elijah heard my voice in the quiet solitude of a cave. Even I regularly withdrew from the crowds to spend time alone with the Father. I thought about how many of my own spiritual breakthroughs had occurred in moments of solitude during quiet prayer, while reading scripture, in times of deep reflection. So being alone isn't necessarily a bad thing. Being alone only becomes loneliness when you forget that I am with you. Solitude only becomes isolation when you believe you are truly by yourself. The eighth truth about loneliness is that you are never actually alone. You are just sometimes unaware of the company you keep. Jesus smiled, and that simple smile somehow made the entire sprawling parking lot feel less empty, less intimidating. Even right now, before I appeared to you visibly, I was here. When you were crying in this car, I was crying with you. When you felt forgotten, I was remembering every single detail of your pain. When you thought no one cared, I was carrying your burden with an infinite intensity. But why can't I always feel your presence like this? I asked, a question that had plagued me for years. Why do I have to go through these agonizing periods of feeling abandoned? The ninth truth about loneliness, he replied, is that learning to sense my presence in the ordinary moments, without the need for dramatic appearances, is a vital part of spiritual maturity. I am not absent when you cannot see me. You are simply learning to recognize me in subtler ways. He pointed to my phone again. Every time someone reaches out to you with genuine care, that is me expressing my love through them. Every sunset that moves your heart to awe, every piece of music that touches your soul, every moment of unexpected kindness from a stranger, I am present in all of it. You've been looking for me in supernatural experiences while missing me in the natural ones all around you. The 10th truth about loneliness, Jesus said, his voice becoming more intense, more focused, is that it is often preparation for a deeper ministry. When you intimately understand the pain of isolation, you can recognize it in others and offer them genuine comfort. When you have personally experienced the deep hunger for authentic connection, you can provide it to people who are starving for it. He leaned forward, his gaze holding such a depth of love that I felt completely overwhelmed by it. Think about why I have allowed you to experience this profound loneliness tonight. Tomorrow, you are scheduled to speak to a room full of men who feel exactly the way you feel right now. They are successful on the outside, empty on the inside. They are surrounded by people but feel deeply and profoundly alone. How can you possibly help them if you have never been where they are? A wave of understanding washed over me. So this isn't just about my personal struggle. It's about equipping me to help others who are struggling with the same thing. Every period of loneliness you've ever experienced, every moment of feeling disconnected, every season of isolation, all of it has been preparing you to be a voice of hope for people who think they are the only ones feeling this way. Your pain becomes their healing, but only when you are willing to share it honestly. Jesus stood up inside the car. Somehow the roof did not constrain him, and his presence seemed to fill the entire space, pushing against the very windows. But here's what I need you to understand about community, Jonathan. Real fellowship is not about finding people who are impressed by you. It is about finding people who are brave enough to be real with you, and you receiving the gift of being real with them in return. How do I find those people? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Stop performing and start sharing. Stop trying to be inspirational and start being honest. Stop presenting your polished self and start revealing your struggling self. When you show people your authentic humanity, you give them permission to show you theirs. And that, Jonathan, is where real community begins. The truth about your college friends, Jesus continued, is that they didn't stop loving you because you became successful. They started feeling like they couldn't relate to you because you stopped being vulnerable with them. They see your public success and naturally assume you no longer need the same things they need: friendship, support, understanding, acceptance. He sat back down, somehow fitting perfectly within the car seat once more. What if you reached out to them, not as Jonathan who plays Jesus, but as Jonathan, their friend who sometimes feels lost and lonely? What if you admitted to them that success hasn't solved your deepest needs? What if you confessed that you miss them and that you need their friendship far more than you need their admiration? The idea was simultaneously terrifying and exhilaratingly appealing. What if they've moved on? What if they don't want that kind of relationship with me anymore? Then you will know, and you can grieve that loss and begin to look for community elsewhere. But what if? What if they are waiting for the exact same thing you are waiting for? Permission to be real. Permission to admit that their lives aren't as perfect as they pretend on social media. Permission to reconnect on a level deeper than superficial updates. Jesus reached out and gently touched my chest, right over my heart. And in that instant, I could feel what he felt. Not just an overwhelming love for me, but a boundless, heartbreaking love for every single person who had ever felt alone, abandoned, or forgotten throughout all of human history. The final truth about loneliness, he said softly, is that it is one of the most universal human experiences. Almost everyone you will ever meet is carrying some form of it. When you learn to recognize it and address it with compassion, both in yourself and in others, you become an agent of my healing in a world full of isolated people. The car was now filled with a peace so profound, so complete, that my earlier despair felt like a distant memory belonging to someone else entirely. So, what do I do now? I asked. How do I move from this understanding to actual connection? Jesus began to fade slightly, his form becoming more translucent, and I knew our time together was ending. Start with honesty. In your speech tomorrow, don't just talk about finding purpose. Talk about feeling purposeless. Don't just share your successes, share your struggles. Don't just offer inspiration, offer authenticity. And with your personal relationships, he continued, his voice a gentle echo, take the first step. Send that text to your college friends. Call your family members. Reach out not with updates about your career, but with questions about their hearts. Risk being real, and watch how it creates the space for others to be real too. As he disappeared completely, Jesus left me with one final, resonating thought that settled deep into my soul. You are never alone, Jonathan. But sometimes you need to experience the feeling of being alone to truly appreciate the gift of genuine connection with me and with others who are brave enough to be known. And then he was gone. I was left sitting alone in my car in a McDonald's parking lot, holding the most profound and life-altering understanding of loneliness and community I had ever received. The dawn of authentic community. I remained in that McDonald's parking lot until the first rays of sunrise began to paint the dark sky with strokes of orange and pink. I was processing the most transformative conversation of my life. The harsh fluorescent lights from the restaurant continued their unrelenting glow, but I no longer felt their coldness. The steady hum of highway traffic began to pick up as California awakened around me, but I was in no hurry to leave this sacred ground, this place where I had discovered with absolute certainty that I was never truly alone. The very first thing I did was reach for my phone, not to mindlessly check social media or respond to work messages, but to do something I had been terrified to do for months. I opened my text thread with David, my college roommate. Instead of typing out a generic, non-committal response about being busy, I wrote something completely different, something raw and real. David, seeing that photo last night broke my heart. Not because I wasn't invited, but because I realized I've become the kind of friend who seems too busy or important to just hang out and eat pizza. I miss you guys more than you can possibly know. I miss being just Jonathan with the people who knew me before I was anyone special. Would you be up for a call sometime? Not to talk about work, but just to talk, like we used to. I hit send before my fear could convince me to delete it. Then, I did something else that terrified me. I scrolled through my contacts and found my sister Maria's number. We had grown so distant over the past few years, not because of any conflict, but through the gradual, silent erosion of real conversation. Every time we talked, it was a rapid-fire exchange of surface-level updates about our careers and schedules, a far cry from the deep, heart-to-heart conversations that used to define our relationship. Maria, I texted, I know it's early, but I've been thinking about how much I miss really talking with you. Not just updates about life, but actual conversation about what we're struggling with, what we're hoping for, what we're afraid of. I feel like I've been so focused on my career that I've forgotten how to be your brother. Can we please talk soon? By 6 a.m., I had sent similar messages to 5 people whose absence in my life had left a tangible void, people I felt too proud or too scared to reach out to. Each message was brutally honest about my loneliness, vulnerable about my deep-seated need for real connection, and completely free from any pretense that I had my life figured out. I finally drove the remaining 3 hours to San Francisco, but I was a completely different person from the one who had left Los Angeles the day before. The dread that had been sitting in my stomach about the speaking engagement was gone. Instead of feeling like a fraud, I was now genuinely looking forward to the opportunity to be truly helpful to people who might be struggling with the exact same isolation I had just endured. When I arrived at the conference venue that afternoon, the first thing I did was find a trash can and throw away the polished, well-rehearsed speech I had prepared about finding your God-given purpose. I decided instead to speak directly from the heart, from what Jesus had taught me in that parking lot about loneliness and authentic community. Standing on that stage, looking out at an audience of 800 men, I began. How many of you, I asked, my voice steady, have ever felt completely alone in a crowded room? How many of you have achieved some level of success in your life, only to feel emptier the higher you climbed? How many of you have dozens, maybe hundreds, of acquaintances, but struggle to name even one person who truly, deeply knows you? I could see heads nodding all throughout the vast auditorium. The response was immediate, palpable, and overwhelming. Last night, I sat in a McDonald's parking lot in Bakersfield at 2 a.m., crying, because I realized that despite having a career that connects me to millions of people, I felt completely and utterly alone. And in that moment of total honesty about my isolation, I had an encounter that changed everything I thought I understood about community and connection. For the next hour, I shared everything. The gradual, painful drift from my college friendships, the invisible walls I had built between my public and private self, the suffocating loneliness that success had paradoxically created, and most importantly, the 10 truths that Jesus had taught me about authentic relationship. I talked about the crucial difference between being seen and being known, between admiration and love, between performance and vulnerability. But I didn't stop there. I shared the practical steps toward genuine community that Jesus had revealed to me. Stop performing and start sharing. Stop trying to be impressive and start being honest. Stop presenting your polished self and start revealing your struggling self. The response at the end was unlike anything I had ever experienced at a speaking event. Instead of the usual polite applause and a few brief handshakes, men approached me with tears in their eyes, eager to share their own hidden experiences of isolation. They thanked me, not for being inspiring, but for giving them permission to finally admit their own loneliness. "I thought I was the only one who felt this way," said a successful businessman who looked, from the outside, like he had everything together. "I have a great job, a nice house, a beautiful family, but I feel completely disconnected from everyone, including my wife. You've shown me that maybe I'm not broken. Maybe I just need to stop pretending I'm perfect." A young pastor pulled me aside, a look of immense relief on his face. "I've been terrified to admit to my congregation that I sometimes feel lonely and isolated. I thought it would shatter their confidence in my leadership. But what you shared today makes me think that my vulnerability might actually help them more than my pretense of having it all figured out." An elderly man, a titan of business for decades, grasped my hand. "Son," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I've spent 40 years building a career and accumulating achievements, but I don't have a single friend I could call if I was in a real crisis. You've helped me realize that it's not too late to start building real relationships, based on authenticity instead of accomplishment." During the lunch break, something unprecedented happened. Instead of the typical networking about business opportunities or people asking for photos, small groups began to form naturally and spontaneously all around the room. Men began sharing honestly with each other about their struggles with loneliness, their hunger for authentic friendship, their deep-seated fears about being truly known. I watched as grown men, successful executives, respected community leaders, accomplished professionals admitted to each other that they felt isolated despite all their achievements. And in that shared admission, something beautiful and sacred happened. They began to connect with each other, not as competitors or contacts, but as fellow human beings who shared the same profound need for genuine community. By the end of the day, I had witnessed the formation of several accountability groups, prayer partnerships, and what looked like the beginning of true friendships. Men were exchanging phone numbers, not for business purposes, but with the explicit goal of checking in on each other's hearts, holding each other accountable to vulnerability, and intentionally creating space for real conversation in their lives. But the most powerful moment for me came during the closing session when one man stood up and said, "I want to apologize to my wife tonight for not letting her really know me. I've been showing her my successful self, but hiding my struggling self. After today, I finally understand that she can't truly love someone she doesn't truly know." Another man added, "I'm going to call my adult children and admit that I've been more focused on being proud of them than being present with them. I want to know their hearts, not just their achievements." On my drive back to Los Angeles the next day, my phone began buzzing with responses to the vulnerable texts I had sent from that McDonald's parking lot. David called within hours of receiving my message. "Jonathan, man, I can't tell you how much your text meant to me," he said, and I could hear the raw emotion in his voice. "We've all been missing you, but we didn't know how to reach out. We see your success, and we just assumed you'd outgrown us, that you don't need your regular friends anymore. We've just been waiting for you to let us know you still want to be a part of our lives." We talked for 2 hours, really talked like we used to in college. He shared about the struggles in his marriage, his fears about being a good father, his own nagging questions about purpose and meaning. I shared about my loneliness, my difficulty in maintaining authentic relationships, my painful realization that success without community feels like a hollow victory. "We're planning another gathering next month," David said before we hung up. "Not a birthday party this time, just a weekend where we can all really catch up. Would you want to come? Not as Jonathan who plays Jesus, but as Jonathan, our friend, who we've missed terribly." I accepted immediately, my heart swelling with a gratitude so immense it almost hurt. My sister Maria called that evening, and our conversation was the deepest we had shared in years. She admitted that she had been feeling distant from me too, unsure how to relate to her brother who had become a public figure. When I shared my experience with loneliness and my hunger for a real family connection, she cried with relief. "I thought you had moved beyond needing your little sister," she said. "I've been so proud of you, but I've also been missing you desperately. I want to know how you're really doing, not just how your career is going." Over the following weeks, as I began to intentionally implement what Jesus had taught me about authentic community, my entire social landscape began to transform. Instead of a wide network of surface-level professional relationships, I began to cultivate a small number of deep, personal friendships. Instead of hiding my struggles, I started sharing them with trusted people who almost always responded with their own disarming honesty. I joined a small group at my church where the explicit purpose was vulnerability and mutual support. I began meeting regularly with a few men who were committed to knowing each other beyond our public personas. I started calling family members not just on holidays, but whenever I needed a real conversation with people who loved me unconditionally. Most importantly, I changed how I approached all my relationships. Instead of trying to be impressive, I focused on being interested. Instead of sharing only my successes, I shared my struggles. Instead of performing my faith, I lived it authentically, including all the parts that were messy and uncertain. Now, I want to share with you the core lessons I learned about overcoming loneliness, because I know with every fiber of my being that I am not the only one who has felt isolated while being surrounded by people. Maybe you are experiencing your own season of disconnection right now. Maybe you have plenty of acquaintances but no close friends, professional contacts but no personal confidants, thousands of social media followers but not a single person who truly knows your heart. The 10 truths Jesus taught me have become my personal framework for building authentic community, and I believe they can be yours as well. Loneliness is not the absence of people, it's the absence of authentic connection. Loneliness often comes from hiding your true self out of fear that you are not lovable. Authentic relationships aren't about going backward. They're about going deeper with who you have become. Loneliness is God's wake-up call, pointing you back toward real community. Loneliness is not a problem to solve, it's a compass pointing toward deeper intimacy. The deepest human connections happen when you are first secure in your divine connection. Isolation often precedes revelation. Profound spiritual experiences happen in solitude. You are never actually alone, you are just sometimes unaware of the company you keep. Spiritual maturity is learning to sense God's presence in ordinary, everyday moments. Your loneliness is often preparation for a deeper ministry to others who feel the same way. But the most practical and actionable lesson I learned is this: authentic community begins with authentic vulnerability. If you want people to know you, you have to risk letting them see you. If you desire genuine relationships, you have to risk being genuinely known. Here's what that looks like in practical terms. Stop waiting for others to reach out first. Take the initiative. Contact the people you've been missing. Don't lead with updates about your life. Lead with questions about theirs. Share your struggles, not just your successes. When someone asks how you are doing, give them a real answer, one that includes your challenges and uncertainties. Ask deeper questions. Instead of "how's work?" try asking, "what's been weighing on your heart lately?" Instead of "how are the kids?" ask, "what are you learning about yourself as a parent?" Create regular opportunities for real conversation. Start a small group. Organize monthly dinners. Establish weekly coffee meetings with people who want to go beyond surface-level interaction. Be the first to admit imperfection. When you acknowledge your own struggles and failures, you create a safe space for others to do the same. Listen without trying to fix. Sometimes, people don't need your solutions. They just need to feel heard, understood, and accepted in their struggles. Follow up on conversations. If someone shares something difficult with you, check on them a few days later. Show them that their heart matters to you beyond that single conversation. Maybe you're reading this and thinking, "I don't have anyone to be vulnerable with, or I wouldn't even know where to start." Begin with prayer. Ask God to bring authentic, life-giving relationships into your life, and then be open and attentive to the people He places in your path. Join a small group at a church. Volunteer for a cause you care about. Or simply start by being more intentional and vulnerable with the relationships you already have. The loneliness you may be experiencing is not a character flaw or a permanent condition. It is your soul's way of telling you that you were created for a deeper connection than you are currently experiencing. You were made for community, designed for intimacy, and called to be known and to know others. Father God, I pray for every single person listening to this who feels alone right now, who is surrounded by people but feels deeply lonely, who has achieved external success but lacks internal connection. Thank you for showing us that loneliness is not your abandonment, but your invitation. Help us to understand that our deep hunger for authentic relationship is evidence of how you created us. For those who have been hiding behind perfect personas, give them the courage to be vulnerable. For those who have been hurt in past relationships, I ask for healing for their hearts and the strength to risk connection again. For those who don't know where to start building community, Bring the right people into their lives and give them the wisdom to recognize authentic friendship when they see it. Help all of us to remember that we are never truly alone because you are always with us. But also help us to understand that you often express your love through human relationships, and that seeking community isn't a sign of weakness, but a beautiful recognition of how you designed us to live. Thank you for the gift of friendship, for the blessing of being known, and for the profound joy of authentic community. Help us to be brave enough to build it, wise enough to nurture it, and grateful enough to celebrate it. In Jesus' name, Amen. The truth I learned in that Bakersfield McDonald's parking lot is a truth that can transform anyone's experience of isolation. You are never truly alone, but sometimes you need to feel alone to truly appreciate the gift of genuine connection. Loneliness is not your enemy. It is your invitation to discover what authentic community really looks like. You don't need more people in your life. You need deeper connection with the people who are already there. You don't need to be more impressive. You need to be more honest. You don't need to wait for others to reach out. You need to take the first brave step toward the kind of relationships your soul is craving. Thank you for allowing me to share what may be the most important lesson about relationships I have ever learned. I love you all, and your very willingness to seek authentic connection is evidence that you were created for something beautiful, the kind of community that reflects God's own heart for His children.